Snow was still falling on Wellington Street the morning. Tate Norris noticed the pill. He noticed it the way a man notices something wrong in a house he has spent 3 years maintaining, not with certainty, not with alarm, but with the quiet unease of a detail that does not belong. He had been there to replace the thermostat coupling in the east wing, a job that should have taken 40 minutes. And he was crossing the main hallway with his tool bag when he saw the nurse set the glass down on the silver tray beside the judge's breakfast. 1 white capsule, 1 pale yellow tablet, and 1 small oval the color of old bone that Tate had not seen before. He had been servicing this house long enough to know what sat on that tray every morning. The oval was new. He said nothing. He was the electrician. He finished the thermostat and drove back to his daughter's school in time to watch her eat lunch through the cafeteria window. The way he did every Tuesday, because that was the only thing Zoe had asked him to keep doing after her mother died. He thought about the oval pill for 11 days before he did anything about it. Judge Harlan Osei had served on the Ontario Superior Court for 26 years. He had written opinions cited in 4 provinces. He had presided over the kind of cases that made law students go quiet in lecture halls. He was 67 years old, and he had Alzheimer's disease. And everyone who worked inside the stone house on Wellington Street knew it. And everyone who worked inside the stone house on Wellington Street was employed by his son-in-law. The diagnosis had come 14 months earlier. The neurologist, a man named Dr. Fawcett, had delivered it with the careful gravity of someone delivering weather forecasts for a storm already arrived. Mild cognitive impairment, moderate trajectory. There was a course of treatment, there were options. But by the time Tate Norris first came to the house, called in by the property management company to update the electrical panel, Dr. Fawcett was no longer the judge's neurologist. A physician named Stanhope had replaced him. Dr. Stanhope made house calls. Dr. Stanhope prescribed the medications that arrived in the silver-lidded boxes from a pharmacy in Oakville. Dr. Stanhope had an office in the same building where Neville Greer maintained his law practice on the 14th floor. Neville Greer had married the judge's daughter, Petra, 9 years ago in a ceremony Tate had read about in the society pages while eating a sandwich in his truck. He had not been at the ceremony. He had not known any of these people then. He had not known them until the electrical panel job, and then the boiler inspection, and then the 3 cracked window frames on the 2nd floor, and then, because he did not overcharge, and because he showed up when he said he would, until he became, without any formal arrangement, the man the property manager called when something needed fixing in the house of the Honorable Harlan Osei. The judge had been sharp in those first months. He forgot names sometimes. He repeated a question about Tate's work van twice in the same conversation, but his eyes were present, watchful, the eyes of a man who had spent decades reading the difference between someone telling the truth and someone performing it. He had liked Tate. He said so plainly, the way old men sometimes said things plainly, because they had stopped seeing the point of indirection. Then, around the 8-month mark, something shifted. It was not dramatic. It was not a sudden decline. It was more that the windows in the judge's eyes slowly began to fog. He started confusing Tate with the previous electrician, a man he called Bernard. He stopped asking about Tate's van. The questions he repeated were no longer questions. They were fragments, half-formed, trailing off. He began to be guided rather than to lead. Wherever Neville Greer's hand went, the judge followed. Tate noticed because he was always fixing something in the background while other people talked. A man who spends his days behind walls and under floors learns to hear things he was not meant to hear. What he heard, over those months, was the sound of a mind being managed. The estate lawyer came on a Wednesday in November. Tate was in the basement checking a junction box when the voices filtered down through the old house. He could not make out the words, but he knew the rhythm of legal language. Careful, paced, a specific kind of formality that signaled documents being prepared. He came up the stairs 20 minutes later and the lawyer was gone. Neville was standing in the front hall, straightening his cufflinks with the satisfaction of a man who has just confirmed a booking. Tate drove home. His daughter was at the kitchen table doing geometry. She was 14 and serious, and she had her mother's habit of chewing the end of her pencil when she was concentrating. He watched her for a moment from the doorway. He thought about the morning her mother had gone for what everyone thought was a routine consultation at St. Michael's and had not come home for 6 days. He thought about Dr. Arnav Sharma, the internist who had fought the hospital committee for 3 nights running to keep Cass in the immunosuppressant trial, and who had lost his hospital privileges 4 months later over a billing irregularity that no one who knew Arnav believed for a moment was real. He thought about Zoe's university fund, which existed because Tate had rebuilt it coin by coin after the medical bills, and which was still $18,000 short of where it needed to be, and about the scholarship application that had come back last spring with a form letter, noting that Zoe's file contained an administrative flag that made her ineligible. He had called the scholarship office. The flag, they told him, had been placed by an automated eligibility screening system. The system was operated by the Greer Education Consortium, which administered several provincial bursaries on behalf of an unnamed institutional partner. He had not known then who Neville Greer was. He knew now. He went back to the table and helped his daughter with the geometry and did not say anything about any of it. The oval pill was the thing he could not let go. He was not a pharmacist. He was not a doctor. He was a licensed electrician with a trade certificate and 11 years of experience, and a very precise habit of noticing when something in a system was wrong. He had learned this from his father, who had been a pipe fitter, and who had told him once that the most dangerous problems were never the obvious ones. They were the ones that looked almost right. The oval pill looked almost right. It was sitting on a tray with the other medications. It arrived in the same silver-lidded box from the same Oakville pharmacy. But it had not been there in September, and it had not been there in October, and now it was, and the judge's fog had thickened considerably since October. Tate photographed it on his phone through the hallway window. Not a good photograph. Too far, slightly blurred, but enough to see the shape and the faint embossed mark on the surface. He spent 3 evenings going through pharmaceutical identification databases, the kind available to anyone on the College of Pharmacists website. He found the tablet listed under 2 names, a brand name and a clinical designation. He found the clinical trial data 1 page further. The compound had been studied for sedation management in post-surgical patients. In controlled doses, it produced mild cumulative cognitive blunting. In sustained low doses over weeks or months, the trial notes flagged something the researchers had described as reversible but prolonged, a measurable reduction in executive function and short-term memory encoding that could, in a patient already presenting with early cognitive impairment, significantly accelerate the visible symptoms of decline. He sat in his truck in front of his house for a long time after he read that. The street was quiet. His neighbor's dog was barking at something in the dark. He thought about the estate lawyer. He thought about the judge's eyes in September, present and watchful, and the judge's eyes now, absent and drifting. He thought about the document he had not been able to read, but whose rhythm he had recognized. He thought about Neville straightening his cuff links. He went inside and sat at the kitchen table until midnight. He had no plan. He had a photograph and a web search, and a feeling in his chest that felt like it did. The winter he had watched a transformer on Elgin Street begin to overheat. Knowing something was wrong. Knowing he had minutes. Knowing that the wrong move was as dangerous as no move at all. He went back to the house the following Tuesday to replace a light fixture in the east corridor. The nurse, her name was Darlene, and she had been in the house 3 months, brought in by Neville after the previous nurse had left without explanation, was in the kitchen when he arrived. The judge was in his chair in the sitting room, looking at a book he was not reading. Tate worked slowly. He let the job take longer than it needed to, and when Darlene went upstairs to change the linens, he crossed the sitting room and crouched beside the judge's chair. "Good morning, sir." The old man looked at him. The fog was there, but beneath it something moved, a flicker, the way a candle moves in a draft. "Bernard," the judge said. "It's Tate, sir. Norris, I do the electrical work." A pause. "Yes." Something settling. Yes, Tate. Sir, I need to ask you something. Do you know what the oval pill is? The new one on your tray. The judge looked at the window. Stanhope, he said. Stanhope prescribes. Did he explain what it's for? For the sentence didn't complete. The judge's eyes moved to the door, back to Tate, back to the window. Neville manages the medical, he said. Neville handles everything now. Tate nodded. He stood. He picked up his tool bag. He was at the door when the judge spoke again, clearly in the voice of a different version of himself. My daughter called on Sunday, he said. She called and I told Neville, and Neville said she was confused about the time. Tate stopped. She called from Vancouver, the judge said. I heard her voice. I know her voice. He turned around. The judge was still looking at the window. His hands, resting in his lap, had tightened on the book. She called, and then Neville said she hadn't. Petra Osei had married Neville Greer at 29, which was the year her father had been appointed to the bench, and the year she had finished her second fellowship in environmental law at UBC. She was 38 now, and she practiced out of a small firm in Vancouver, and she called her father every Sunday at 2 o'clock Eastern, because that was when he was usually most himself. She had not spoken to him in 6 weeks. Every call rang through to a woman who identified herself as a care coordinator and who told her, in a voice of exhausted patience, that the judge was resting, was in therapy, was sleeping, was with Dr. Stanhope. She had driven to the house in August, and Neville had met her at the door and told her, with the gentle authority of someone managing a difficult situation, that the visits were being limited on Dr. Stanhope's recommendation, because disruptions to routine had been shown to increase confusion in patients at this stage. He had held her hand when he said it. He had looked very sorry. She had driven back to the airport. She had not stopped believing that something was wrong, but she had stopped knowing how to say it in a way that anyone would hear. On the 4th of December, she received a text from an unknown number. It contained one photograph and one sentence. The photograph showed a pale oval pill on a silver tray. The sentence read, I think you should know what this is. She replied immediately. Who is this? The answer came back. The electrician. Your father said you called on Sunday. She did not fly in right away. Tate had asked her not to. He needed time, and he needed her arrival to be useful rather than visible. He needed Neville not to know she was coming. He explained this in a series of careful texts that he sent from his truck at the end of his workdays, and she answered them in the same register, measured, specific, with the precision of someone trained to build a case. He used the time to find Arnav Sharma. It was not difficult. Arnav had not disappeared. He had lost his hospital privileges, and then his clinic billing number, and then, after a college review that Tate read about in 3 paragraphs at the bottom of a medical news brief, his license to practice. He had moved to Sudbury. He was running a supply depot for a northern outfitter, and he had not spoken about medicine, as far as Tate could tell from the limited public record, in 2 years. Tate called him on a Tuesday evening. The phone rang 7 times. I don't do consultations, Arnav said, before Tate had finished explaining who he was. I know, Tate said. I'm not asking for a consultation, I'm asking you to look at a pill. Silence. You treated my wife, Tate said. Cassandra Norris, St. Michael's 2019, you fought the committee for her. A longer silence. How is she? Arnav said. She died in 2021. The treatment bought us 2 years. He heard Arnav breathe. Send me the photograph, Arnav said. Don't call this number again until I say you can. He called back in 4 days. The compound, Arnav explained, in the flat voice of a man who had been professionally stripped of the right to explain things, was not approved for outpatient cognitive management in Canada. It had completed Phase 2 trials in the US, primarily for acute post-surgical sedation, and it had been withdrawn from Phase 3 after 2 sites flagged accumulation effects in patients with prior neurological vulnerability. In low continuous doses, delivered daily over several months, it would produce precisely the picture Tate had described. It was not a standard pharmaceutical. It was not something a general practitioner would prescribe, or a general pharmacy would stock. The Oakville Pharmacy, Arnav said, when Tate gave him the name, was not in the provincial dispensary registry. It was not a real pharmacy. Tate sat very still in his truck. The heater was running. The street outside was empty. "He's being poisoned," Tate said. "I can't testify to that," Arnav said. "I don't have a license. I can't testify to anything." "But you're telling me." "I'm telling you," Arnav said. "What the pharmacology literature says. I'm not telling you anything else. If he stopped getting the pill, the accumulation half-life is roughly 30 to 40 days at these doses. There would be a washout period. The literature suggests substantial cognitive recovery is possible, assuming the underlying impairment is genuinely early stage." A pause. "The original diagnosis, mild cognitive impairment, not Alzheimer's. Not the same thing. Not the same prognosis." Tate closed his eyes. "One more thing," Arnav said. "The prescribing physician. What name did you say?" "Stanhope. There is no Dr. Stanhope registered with the Ontario College of Physicians and Surgeons. There has not been since 2017, when a Gerald Stanhope had his registration revoked for falsifying assessment records in a capacity evaluation." The heater ran. Outside, a car went past on the wet street. "Same man?" Tate asked. "I can't tell you that." He went back to the house on a Thursday, called in for a faulty outlet in the library. He took longer than he needed to. Darlene was not there. She had a half day. He had checked the schedule he had found photographed on the kitchen corkboard 3 weeks earlier. The judge was alone in the library when Tate came in, sitting at the long table with a stack of case files from some old year that he shuffled and reshuffled with the patience of someone doing something familiar, because familiar things still hold. Tate set down his bag. He sat across the table. He laid the photograph down between them. He laid the printout from the pharmacology database beside it. He talked. He talked for 20 minutes, clearly and without urgency. The way he talked to Zoe when something was hard and he needed her to hear it, and not only the fear inside it. He explained what the pill was. He explained what Arnav had said. He explained about the pharmacy in Oakville. He explained about Petra's calls. The judge listened. His hands were flat on the table. His eyes moved through the fog towards something on the other side of it. Something he was working to reach the way a man works, to remember a word that is close but not yet arrived. "Petra," he said. "She's been trying to call you. Neville told her you weren't available." The word for what moved through the old man's face then was not anger. It was older than anger. It was the particular expression of a man who has spent his life reading testimony and has just understood that he is the witness who was never called. "The will," he said. "The amendment to the will. When is it being signed?" 3 weeks. "Before Christmas," Neville said. He stopped. "While I'm still." "You're still yourself," Tate said. "You've been made to look like you're not." They could not call the police. Not yet. What they had was a blurred photograph, a telephone conversation with an unlicensed physician, and the word of a man who a court-appointed assessor had recently certified, on the paperwork of a physician who didn't exist, as having diminished capacity. Tate called Petra. She booked a flight. She did not tell Neville. What they needed was the medication itself. Not the photograph, the physical capsules with the seal intact, traceable to the Oakville pharmacy that wasn't in any registry. What they needed was the judge's actual medical record, the one Dr. Fawcett had written 14 months ago, before Stanhope, before Neville managed everything. What they needed was time, and they had perhaps 18 days of it. Petra landed on a Sunday evening. She went directly to a hotel on the other side of the city. Tate picked her up at 7 the next morning in his work van, with the tool bags in the back, because a white van with a trade's name on the door is the most invisible vehicle in any residential neighborhood, and Petra Ose in a rental car outside her father's house would have been visible from the 14th floor. They sat in the van on a side street with coffees going cold in the cup holder, and she told him what she had found. She had found Neville's firm in the property records of 7 seniors' estates in the past decade, always as the administrator, always in cases where the primary heir was distant and the patient had been assessed as having diminished capacity. In 4 of those cases, the assessment had been conducted by the same physician. In 3 of those cases, the estate had been restructured substantially before the patient died. She had not been looking for this for long. She had been looking for 8 days, and she had found this. Tate thought about all the houses with all the electrical panels and all the conversations he had heard through old walls and floors. He thought about how long Neville had been doing this, and how many people had sat in chairs by windows looking at books they weren't reading. He thought about Zoe's scholarship flag and felt something cold and direct settle in his chest. "There's one more thing," Petra said. She opened her phone. "The Greer Education Consortium, the one that flagged your daughter's file. I know what it is. It administers 6 provincial bursaries, all of them sourced from estate trust funds. 4 of the 7 estates I found are listed as consortium contributors." She paused. "Your daughter's application was denied because of an eligibility flag that doesn't correspond to any actual provincial criterion. It was a fabricated disqualifier. The fund her scholarship came from. It's your money, Tate. It's other people's fathers. It's this house." He looked at the windshield. The city moved past it, ordinary and indifferent. "Okay," he said. Arnav drove down from Sudbury on a Wednesday. He did not want to, and then he did. He told Tate on the phone. The second time Tate called, the number he had been told not to call again. That he was coming because there was a man in a chair who was being made to look like something he wasn't. And because Arnav had spent 2 years telling himself that was no longer his problem, and because he had been lying. He arrived in a green pickup with Quebec plates and a coffee thermos he refilled twice at the Tim Hortons on Carling. He did not look like what he had been. He looked like a man who had been a long time in the north and had gotten used to a different kind of quiet. He and Tate sat in the van and Arnav read everything Tate had. The photographs, the database printouts, the pharmacy research, the college records on Stanhope. He read slowly. He asked 2 questions. He was quiet for a while. "I can't testify," he said. "I'm not asking you to testify," Tate said. "I'm asking you to examine him. I'm asking you to write down what you see. Just write it down." Getting Arnav into the house required Neville to be elsewhere, which required Petra to be elsewhere with him, which required Petra to call her husband for the first time in 3 weeks and tell him she was in the city, and would he have dinner with her because she wanted to discuss her father's care. Neville agreed immediately. His voice, Petra told Tate afterward, had been warm and very slightly careful, the voice of a man raw calibrating. While Petra kept Neville at a restaurant on Bank Street, Tate and Arnav went in through the service entrance. Tate had keyed a year ago for the boiler work. Darlene had been given the evening off. Tate had not arranged that, but he had known it was coming, because Darlene had mentioned it to the property manager, and the property manager had mentioned it to Tate when confirming the boiler inspection date. A man who is always fixing things becomes, over time, a man who knows the schedule of a house. The judge was in the sitting room. He looked at the 2 of them with the eyes he had now, fogged and careful, and then he looked at Tate, and something crossed his face. "You came back," he said. "I said I would," Tate said. "Sir, this is a doctor. He's going to look at a few things. He's going to ask you some questions. Is that all right?" The judge looked at Arnav for a long time. Then he straightened in his chair, in the particular way of a man resuming a posture he has maintained for decades. "Ask your questions," he said. Arnav worked for 40 minutes. He did not have instruments. He had his hands and his eyes, and a kind of memory that does not leave a person regardless of what a regulatory body decides about their license. He checked reflexes and tracked responses. He asked the judge to recall 3 words at 5-minute intervals, and to draw a clock face, and to tell him the year, and the name of the current provincial premier. He asked about sleep and appetite, and the sequence of the days. He wrote everything in a small notebook. When he was finished, he sat across from the judge and he spoke to him directly, without medical distance, in the voice of a man who has decided to be honest. He told the judge what he had found. He told him about the compound. He explained what it did and what it had been doing to him, and for how long. He did not soften it. The judge listened. He was very still. He asked one question when Arnav had finished. "What happens if I stop?" "There will be a period of some weeks before the compound clears," Arnav said. "It will not be comfortable. Your clarity will come back unevenly, not all at once. But the underlying impairment is early stage." Without the compound, we are looking at a very different prognosis. How different? Different enough that the amendment to the will needs to wait, Arnav said, until you are yourself again. That night, after they had gone, the judge got up from his chair and walked to the small desk by the window, where he kept a locked drawer. The key was on a ring in his cardigan pocket, where he had kept it since 1987, because his late wife had told him once that a man should always have one drawer no one else can open. He unlocked it. Inside was a legal pad, a fountain pen, and a photograph of his daughter at her UBC convocation, standing very straight, laughing at something outside the frame. He began to write. He wrote for 2 hours. He wrote the way he had written opinions for 26 years. Carefully, with the awareness that every word was load-bearing. He described the medication he had been told was for his condition and had not been. He described Stanhope. He described the calls from Petra that Neville had told him had not happened. He described the foggy months and the things he had felt through the fog, imprecisely but real, the way a man feels the shape of a room in the dark. He signed it with his name and his bar number, which he had not used in 11 years, and which he remembered without looking it up, because some things do not leave. In the morning, he gave the document to Tate. He also gave him the pill bottle, the entire silver-lidded container from Oakville, which he had not taken from that morning, and would not take again. And he gave him the name of the lawyer who had drafted his original will, a woman named Priscilla Tam, who had practiced in Ottawa for 30 years, and who had always dealt with him directly, and had never, in his experience, been in the same room as Neville Greer. Priscilla Tam answered her own phone. She listened for 11 minutes without interrupting. Then she said, "I need to see him." She drove down the next day. What happened in the following 2 weeks happened through lawyers and the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit and a toxicologist at the Ottawa Hospital who analyzed the compound from the Oakville pharmacy and wrote a report that used the phrase deliberate pharmaceutical deception in its summary paragraph. It happened through Petra, who met with 3 of the other families from the 7 estates and found 2 of them willing to file. It happened through Arnav's notebook, which was submitted not as expert testimony. He was careful about that, but as a personal account by a physician who had voluntarily surrendered his practice and had no material interest in the outcome. It happened mostly through the judge himself, who sat across a table from 2 RCMP officers and spoke with the precision and clarity of a man whose mind, coming back to him unevenly, like light through breaking cloud, was still the sharpest instrument in the room. Neville Greer was arrested on a Thursday morning at his office on the 14th floor. He was brought out through the lobby in a coat that cost more than Tate made in a month, with his hands cuffed behind him. He did not look at anyone. He looked straight ahead with the expression of a man recalculating, still recalculating, even now. The scholarship flags were reversed in January by order of the provincial ombudsman, pending a full audit of the Greer Education Consortium. The letter came on a Tuesday. Zoe read it at the kitchen table and looked up at her father and said, "Does this mean what I think it means?" "It means what it says," Tate told her. She went back to her homework. After a moment she said, "Did you do something?" He was quiet for a bit. "I noticed something," he said, "and then I didn't let myself stop noticing." The house on Wellington Street was quieter in February. Darlene was gone. Priscilla Tam had connected the judge with a care team she vouched for personally. 2 nurses who had worked with her own mother, unhurried and honest. The fog lifted in pieces, the way Arnav had said it would. Not all at once, not cleanly, but in increments that felt, each time, like a window being found. The judge walked in the garden when the weather allowed. He was not yet the man he had been. He might not be exactly that man again, but he was himself, present, watchful, with the eyes of someone who has learned to read the difference between what is real and what is being performed, and who has not lost the ability to make that distinction count. Arnav came down from Sudbury's once a month. He did not call it medicine. He called it visiting. The college review had been reopened on application, citing new evidence regarding the original billing complaint, which had since been traced to a filing anomaly in records maintained by an administrative contractor whose other clients included the offices of Neville Greer. One afternoon in March, the judge and Arnov sat on the back porch with tea going cold in the cups, the way tea always goes cold when the conversation is more important. The garden was still mostly gray and the oaks were bare, but there was something beginning in the earth below them, that particular readiness of ground that has endured a long winter. Tate was not there that afternoon. He was at Zoe's school for a parent-teacher interview, sitting in a small chair in a bright classroom while her teacher told him his daughter was exceptional. Rigorous, the kind of student who noticed things other students walked past. He nodded. He said thank you. He thought briefly about the oval pill on the silver tray, and the moment he had almost kept walking. He had almost kept walking. He had a heating bill and a tool bag and a daughter who needed a future, and he had almost kept walking because none of it was his problem, and all of it was above him, and he was only the electrician. And then he had not kept walking, and the rest of it had followed from that. Not simply, not quickly, not without cost, but it had followed. He drove home in the late afternoon light. Zoe was already there. Backpack dropped by the door, cereal bowl on the counter, the particular domestic wreckage of a teenager who has not yet learned that things do not clean themselves. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at it, and then he started cleaning up. And the house held them the way houses hold the people inside them, quietly and without ceremony, which is the only way that matters.